Good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is International News Desk. We'll bring you up to date with many news to keep you informed. Starting the news tonight with United Nations warns says 6 million Afghans at risk of famine as crisis heightens. Millions under lockdown as China deals with fresh hit on economy. After night of violence, Baghdad, Iraqi capital, wakes up to gunfire. Iran sentences 2 Swedish citizens to prison on drug charges. And still on Iraq, responses to deadly clashes after al-Sadr quits politics. The United Nations humanitarian chief Antonio Guterres has urged donors to restore funding for development in Afghanistan that was frozen when the Taliban took over a year ago, cautioning that 6 million people were at danger of famine. Martin Griffith and financial donors should quickly provide $770 million to support Afghans survive the coming colder months. Conflicts, poverty, climate shocks, and food insecurity have long been a sad reality in Afghanistan, but he said what makes the present situation so critical is the pause to large-scale development aid. Closely half of Afghanistan's 39 million people require humanitarian assistance, and 6 million are at risk of famine. Over 1 million children are estimated to be suffering from the most critical, life-threatening form of malnutrition and could die without proper treatment, he said. Afghanistan's de facto authorities must also do their part. Bureaucratic interferences and procedures slow down humanitarian assistance when it's needed most. Female humanitarian aid workers must be permitted to work unrestricted and protected. Girls must be allowed to continue their education, he added. The Taliban has not been officially recognized by any foreign government and is still subjected to international sanctions, which the UN and support groups say they are now obstructing humanitarian operations in the country. Griffith says $614 million is immediately needed to prepare for winter, including mending and upgrading shelters and providing warm clothes and blankets, and an additional $154 million to organize food and other supplies before the weather limits entry to some areas. Billions of dollars in Afghan central bank reserves held mainly in the United States have also been frozen by foreign governments to prevent them from falling into Taliban hands. Russia, which called the United Nations Security Council meeting on the eve of the first anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and China have called for those funds to be released. Vasily Nebenzias, Russia's United Nations ambassador, accused the United States and its allies of abandoning Afghans to face ruin, poverty, terrorism, hunger, and other challenges. China's United Nations ambassador Zhang Jun also accused the U.S. and its allies of invading responsibility and abandoning the Afghan people and imposing political isolation and blockade. No country that is serious about containing terrorism in Afghanistan will advocate to give the Taliban prompt, unconditional access to billions in assets. United States Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield said, adding that the U.S. was the top 8 donor to Afghanistan and criticized Russia and China. If you want to talk about how Afghanistan needs help, that's full under lockdown as China deals with a fresh blow to the economy struggling to rebound from closely 3 years of harsh zero-COVID policies. On Tuesday in Hebei, the province surrounding the capital, Beijing, authorities ordered almost 4 million people to stay at home until the end of the week as officials scrambled to bring a minor flare-up of COVID-19 under control. Officials suspended huge events and ordered the closure of entertainment venues and wholesale markets in the southern tech hub of Shenzhen, the Lunghua district, following the announcement of similar measures a day earlier in 3 other districts. The newest measures in Shenzhen include closing the world's biggest wholesale electronics market, bring closely half of the city's 18 million residents under strict COVID-19 curbs. In Dalian, a main port in northeastern China known for soybeans and iron ore, some 3 million residents were placed under lockdown until at least Sunday. Authorities announced that over 30 million residents will have to undergo mass testing from 6 a.m. following the discovery of 51 COVID cases in Tianjin, a port city in China's northeast. China has doubled down on a zero-tolerance policy targeted at stamping out COVID-19 at almost any cost, even as the rest of the world learns to live with the virus. Beijing's doubling down on the provocative strategy comes as the ruling Communist Party gears up for an important meeting later this year at which Chinese President Xi Jinping is anticipated to secure an unprecedented third term in power. China's economy hardly dodged contraction during the April-June quarter as lockdowns and border controls pummeled economic activity, with gross domestic product (GDP) expanding just 0.4% year-on-year. Hostilities is ongoing, killing at least 30 people in the Iraqi capital between followers of Shia religious leader Muqtada al-Sadr and his Iran-backed opponents, as well as Iraqi security forces. On Tuesday, residents of Baghdad woke up to the sound of sporadic gunfire and explosions from the fortified Green Zone, an area that houses government buildings and foreign embassies. The Iraqi military said militia fighters had fired numerous rockets at the Green Zone. The streets stood empty after the military declared a curfew on Monday evening after the violence started. Al-Sadr's ally had assembled on the Republican Palace, which houses the headquarters of Iraqi government, as well as a sit-in where supporters of the rival coordination framework alliance meet after al-Sadr claimed he was withdrawing from politics earlier on Monday. Al-Sadr has declared his withdrawal from politics many times, only to later backtrack. As night fell, heavy fighting broke out, the vilest the Iraqi capital has seen in years. According to reports by morning, Iraqi security forces said they had forced al-Sadr supporters out of the Republican Palace, saying that negotiations are taking place between government officials and leaders from the Sadrists and the Coordination Framework Alliance. The violence is the conclusion of a political crisis that started after parliamentary elections in October, in which allies of al-Sadr appeared as the largest party but were unable to form a government. In June, he removed his bloc from parliament before his supporters stormed the parliament building in late July in an attempt to stop lawmakers from choosing a new prime minister. The religious leader has asked for the dissolution of parliament. The Iraqi Supreme Federal Court had planned to pass judgment on that call, but the meeting is now expected to be suspended as all state institutions are closed. The fight has also spread to other parts of southern and central Iraq, with reports of fighting in many cities and al-Sadr supporters raiding the offices of their political rivals. Still on the news, 2 Swedish nationals have been sentenced by a court in Iran to separate terms in prison and enforce financial punishment on drug charges. Masoud Satayeshi, the country's judiciary spokesman, said the 2 individuals identified as Simon Casper Brown and Stephen Kevin Gilbert have been sentenced to 5 and 8 years in prison, respectively. Brown has also been asked to pay 10 times the value of his alleged contraband, equaling over 10 billion Iranian rials, more than $330,000 at current open market exchange rates. And Gilbert was also given 150 million rials, about $500 in financial penalties, and 60 tazari, discretionary custodial punishment, lashes, according to Satayeshi. Reports of the 2 men's arrests have been revealed by Iran in July 2020, with local media reporting their arrest, which came as part of an investigation aiming an international drug trafficking network. Their trials had opened in September 2021 at the 15th Chamber of Tehran's Revolutionary Tribunal. At that time, report had said they were arrested with nearly 10 kilograms of 20.4 pounds of opium resin and 20,000 tramadol painkiller tablets. Iran's intelligence ministry acknowledged it and arrested a Swedish national on charges of spying, saying the unnamed individual entered the country as a tourist but in contact with a number of suspected European and non-European elements in Iran to extract information in late July. Ties between Tehran and Stockholm have been frayed amidst growing tensions in recent years. Tehran has also called for the fast release of Hamid Nauri, an Iranian citizen who was sentenced to life in prison in July on charges of murder during his time as assistant to the deputy prosecutor in an Iranian prison in 1988. Tehran recalled its ambassador to Sweden at the time, but said it has no instant plans to cut or reduce diplomatic relations with Sweden. Iraq's political crisis has sloped into violence, with Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr's declaration to quit politics sparked protests and clashes that killed nearly 20 people and wounded dozens more. According to a spokesman, Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, said he is following the protests in Iraq with concern. Guterres appealed for calm and restraint and urged all important actors to take quick steps to reduce the situation and avoid any violence, saying all parties and actors must rise above their differences and engage without more delay in a peaceful and inclusive dialogue on a constructive way forward. The unrest in Iraq is disturbing because they were hindering the operation of Iraqi institutions, and urge all parties to remain peaceful and avoid acts that could lead to a cycle of violence, U.S. Ambassador to Iraq Alina Romanowski said. Iran closed its border with Iraq until further notice, while its embassy in Baghdad asked Iranians in the country to travel to Baghdad, reports say. The European Union voiced concern about the crisis in Baghdad and called on all parties to exercise utmost restraint and to remain calm. Turkey urged its citizens to refrain from traveling to Baghdad and called for inclusive dialogue to solve the ongoing crisis. Canada's ambassador to Iraq, Gregory Gilligan, said he is deeply alarmed by the violence across the country. The UK's charge of the affairs in Iraq, James Dorner, stated his concern over casualties, urging protesters to stay away from invasions into government buildings and security forces to respond in a proportionate manner. There are more stories. United States President Biden seeks approval for $1.1 billion arms sale to Taiwan. According to reports, Joe Biden, United States President, sets to ask Congress to approve an estimated $1.1 billion arms sale to the self-ruled island of Taiwan, including 60 anti-ship missiles and 100 air-to-air missiles. The package, which is still in an early stage, includes 60 AGM-84L Harpoon Block 2 missiles for $355 million, 100 AIM-9X Block 2 Sidewinder tactical air-to-air missiles for $85.6 million, and $655.4 million for a surveillance radar contract extension, 3 people acquainted with the matter said, according to reports. The Sidewinder missiles will be used to arm Taipei's US-made F-16 fighter jets. Taiwan, which is claimed by Beijing, is one of the region's most vibrant democracies, and the United States is bound by law to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. The report of new weapons comes amidst growing tension with China, which has not ruled out the use of force to take control of Taiwan, staging unprecedented military exercises in the sea and air around the island following a visit this month by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The U.S. said on Sunday it had sent 2 of its warships through the strait in a freedom of navigation exercise. Once the Biden administration enacts the notification, the deal will need approval from the Foreign Affairs Committees of Congress. The legislators are expected to approve the sale, the report said. Again on business and economy, the International Monetary Fund approved revival of Pakistan's massive loan program. Finance Minister Miftah Ismail said the International Monetary Fund IMF board has approved the 7th and 8th reviews of Pakistan's bailout program, which will release $1.17 billion in funds to the cash-strapped country, saying that IMF agreed to lengthen the program by a year and add the funds by $1 billion. The money will be a lifeline to the South Asian country presently suffering from devastating floods, whose foreign exchange reserves have fallen to levels that cover only a month of exports and whose economy has wrangled with a huge present account deficit and high inflation. The support comes as Pakistan's economy has been knocked by adverse external conditions due to spillovers from the war in Ukraine and domestic challenges, said IMF Deputy Managing Director Antoniette Saye in a statement. Pakistan's 36-month, $6 billion extended fund facility program, which entered in 2019, has been delayed since early this year as it struggled to meet targets set by the lender. The board was planned to take up Pakistan's reviews in a meeting on Monday. The new agreement follows months of deeply unpopular belt-tightening by the government of Shehbaz Sharif, who took power in April and has effectively removed fuel subsidies and introduced fresh actions to widen the tax base. Ismail said government labors to get the program back on track via painful corrective economic measures have saved Pakistan from default. The approval from the IMF board will open other multilateral and bilateral avenues of funding for Pakistan, which were awaiting a clear bill of health from the lender. Pakistan is anxious for international funding for its economy, which suffers from poor revenue collection and declining foreign reserves to pay its crippling debts. In Africa, 18 killed as Madagascar police shoot at albino kidnap protest. On Monday, a senior doctor has said 18 people died after police in Madagascar opened fire on what they call a lynch mob annoyed at the kidnap of a child with albinism, and 34 were also wounded in the incident. Of the injured, 9 are between life and death. We are waiting for a government helicopter to evacuate them to the capital. People with albinism are frequently at the aim of violence on the large Indian Ocean island. Over a dozen abductions, attacks and murders have been recorded in the past 2 years, according to the United Nations. According to Jean Brunel, a member of parliament from that district, said a child with albinism was reportedly kidnapped last week in town of Ikongo. 4 suspects have been arrested by the government, but the residents went to the barracks on Monday demanding that the suspect be handed over, the lawmaker said. Some 500 protesters armed with blazing machetes tried to force their way into the station. A police officer involved in the shooting said, speaking on condition of anonymity, police first fired tear gas and then rounds in the air to try to scatter the crowd, he added. The National Police in the capital confirmed the very sad events, but only gave a figure of 11, with 18 injured. Andri Rako, the National Police chief, said, according to reports, what happened was a very sad event. It could have been avoided, but it happened. He said the police did their best to restrain from confrontation, including negotiation with the crowd. But there were provocations. There were people with long-bladed knives and sticks, he said, adding that others threw stones towards the police. But in the end, the officers had no choice but option to self-defense and reduce the damage by shooting. Now, the People's Movement for Liberation of Angola, MPLA, victory splits views in Luanda. Angola's ruling party, People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, won the presidential polls, giving incumbent President João Lourenço a second term in the near inspection in the country's history. In the streets of Luanda, where the opposition obtained 62.25% of the votes, views are split. I am very angry with this party. We don't want this MPLA, People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola party, to stay in power. Since 1975, it has always governed. We wanted another party to govern us because we want a change in the country, said street vendor Rebecca. While student Jose Nilsson said, I am very happy with His Excellency President João Lourenço. He's done a good job, and I also wish him good luck with his new 5-year term. The ruling MPLA won with 51.70% of the votes in what was its worst ever result since the independence from Portugal in 1975. And finally, still on Angolan politics, João Lourenço, re-elected Angolan president, promises to press ahead with changes. The re-elected president of Angola, João Lourenço, promised to press on with political commitments, with courage and responsibility during his second term. The National Electoral Commission on Monday announced the results of the election, the tightest in the country's history. Since Angola's independence in 1975, the ruling party, People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, that has been in power, won with 51.17% of the vote against 43.95% for the main opposition party, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA. The ruling party holds an absolute majority in parliament with 124 seats out of 220, but it loses the totals majority that permits it to pass laws without the aid of another party. Many members of the NEC refused to sign the final result last week. The opposition contested the preliminary results, which already gave the MPLA the victory. Parties have 72 hours after the declaration of the final results to contest them. To refresh our memories, United Nations warns, says 6 million Afghans at risk of famine as crisis heightens. Millions under lockdown as China deals with fresh hit on economy. After night of violence, Baghdad, Iraqi capital, wakes up to gunfire. Iran sentences 2 Swedish citizens to prison on drug charges, and still in Iraq, responses to deadly clashes after al-Sadr quits politics. That's all for international news this evening. Be mindful, be grateful, be positive, be true, be kind, and thank you for the privilege of your time. Have a good evening.